So, welcome everyone. This month, our topic is affording individuals an opportunity to explore employment. So, before we dive into our topic, we are doing our standard poll question to get things rolling and to find out who's in the audience. So let us know what your role is. Are you a support coordinator, a service provider, regional office employee, other state employee, an individual or family member, or other? And of course, if you mention other, please put it in the chat box. All right. And it seems like the majority of us fall in that support coordinator realm. There are a few service providers also, and a couple of people mentioned that they really don't fit in any of those roles. One of the comments in the chat box was that support coordinator 3 role, so kind of that mentor support coordinator role. All right. So, of course, October is National Disability Employment Awareness Month. And a lot of times what we see during the month of October is all this messaging to businesses about the value of having a diversified workforce that includes people of all abilities. But I also think this is a perfect opportunity to recognize the work and effort each and every one of us does to promoting employment awareness. So support coordinators, you guys are key about talking about goals about employment, talking about those expectations for being employed, connecting people to the services and supports they need to achieve that type of outcome. Of course, we can't do it without our service providers being out there providing that front line of support to help people get connected with the jobs, to succeed in those jobs, and to even explore what their employment interests are. So it's all of us pulling together that helps make employment a possibility for a lot of individuals. So we all have a role to play, and we all um, should take a little bow for all the work we do, and the individuals themselves too. So want to set the stage a little bit now. So we know from our own National Core Indicator surveys, and if you're not familiar with the National Core Indicator surveys, these are surveys that are conducted with individuals who have waiver funding. Goes out every year, and there's usually some standard questions that are asked. One of the standard questions asked is, are you employed in competitive integrated employment? Meaning that the employment is integrated. So the person may be working alongside others who may or may not have disabilities. They're making at least minimum wage or whatever the prevailing wage might be for that industry. And of course, there's those opportunities for growth within that company. So uh, of the individuals who are not currently competitive integrated employed that have waiver funding, about 41% said, but they would like to. They would like to have that outcome. So we know the interest is pretty high. A big chunk um, of people are interested in competitive integrated employment. However, when we look at our own empowering through employment data, we know that only about 9% of individuals are being connected with waiver-funded employment supports. So 41% have an interest, only 9% are taking advantage of waiver funding to help them achieve that outcome. So it kind of begs the question, what's going on with the other 32%? What's happening there? So with you guys being on the front line, we want to do a quick little reality check. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's see. So we want to do a quick little reality check and see why it is, why that disparity. So from your perspective, are most of the people using VR and not needing waiver funded supports? Are individuals using programs or supports outside of waiver funding? Maybe they're doing sheltered employment. Maybe they're taking advantage of college or training programs or supports available through the job center. Or maybe they're just going out and getting jobs on their own with the assistance of friends and family. Maybe they're using waiver funded supports for other things like skill development, community integration, day hab. They're just not using waiver funding for employment support though. Maybe your experience is that not many people are interested in employment, or that maybe you've got a younger caseload. Or maybe most of the people on your caseload, in your opinion, you feel that they're not quite ready. So take a moment to let us know what your experience is. You can select all that apply, and we'll kind of report back after we have the results. Okay, and now the results are. So we've got quite a few people saying that individuals are using VR, so they're not quite needing waiver funded supports. There's the next most popular one is that people are using those programs or supports that aren't waiver funding. So they might be going to a sheltered workshop. They might be participating in a college or a training program, or using job center supports, or getting a job on their own. So we did have somebody put in the chat box that their caseload is younger individuals. So their response might have been that most of the individuals on my caseload aren't quite ready. They're too young. Um, so thank you for helping us kind of try to take a deeper dive into what's going on with that other 32%. So now we want to dive in and have a closer look with how one of our service agencies are approaching employment. So I've asked Chris Cockrell, who is the employment coordinator for the Novus Center of the Ozarks. They are down in the Springfield area. I believe it's Greene County, right, Chris? So
Correct.
he's going to talk to you about how he's approaching employment and um, the impact it's having in his community. So just to kind of lay the groundwork here. So back when we kicked off the Empowering Through Employment initiative back in the end of 2016, There in Greene County, they only had about 6.1% of individuals between the ages of 16 to 64 with Partnership for Hope, community support, or comprehensive waiver slot that were using their waiver for employment support. So about 45 individuals. And as of September 2021, that number has now grown to about 61 individuals, or 7.5%. So they've had a net increase of about 36% in the number of individuals accessing employment supports there in Greene County. So again, Chris is going to kind of walk us through what his organization has done that has kind of helped with that change. So, Chris, go ahead and take it away. Tell us about your approach.
Very good. Thank you, Sandy. And thanks to all of you for allowing me to be a part of the discussion and conversation this afternoon. Yes, we are a provider in various areas of services and support in the Springfield area, like other providers in this area and throughout the state. Obviously, our focus today is on employment services and the aspects that are attached to those programs. And I'd like to give you just an overview of some of the tools and strategies that I've used that I have seen benefit planning committee members and teams, as well as support coordinators. And I think I'm speaking today as a practitioner to all of you who are practitioners. And I think it's a very collegial and very much of a team approach, as Sandy implied. I think it's very much of a partnering experience and certainly that team effort. This afternoon, with the time we have, and I could spend a lot of time on this, but I certainly want to be brief and respectful of everyone's time today. I think what I would like for the takeaways to be would be either to gain some new information or increase awareness among those of us that are here today, or maybe a different perspective, or perhaps strategies that might help in your planning and introducing this concept we call employment services and support, and to impact consumers' bottom line and increase services and opportunities for our consumers that we support and serve and are committed to. Before I kind of go through some of the things that I have found helpful and useful, I would certainly welcome any comments or questions through my email address. Feel free to do that. Or if you'd like maybe further conversation, please feel free to do that. My email address, for those of you that might be interested in a follow-up discussion or delving into this a little more in depth, last name Cockrill, first initial and then my last name, at team, TEAM, and then just simply an abbreviation for Novus Center is ncoto.org. So it's first initial, last name at team, ncoto.org. So I would welcome that at any time. Please feel free to do that as a follow-up or further discussion. Perhaps I might start by saying the obvious, and for those of you, particularly in support coordinator roles, you feel like you wear many hats. I think that's an understatement, perhaps, that you expect of yourself or others expect to have multiple areas of expertise. And we know the reality that we can't assume that responsibility in every area. And so therefore, I think that further emphasizes the need to have this a team approach. And I think that speaks well of any area of services and support. Today, I know our topic is employment, but I think that's true of any area that we might be considering for our consumers during that planning process, annual planning or quarterly meetings. But I think at times support coordinators are expected to be experts in many different fields and areas of support. And that's where I think my role has been to partner with planning teams and support coordinators like yourself in our area and help with that process, help with that understanding and awareness on the part of team members, parents, guardians, consumers, and obviously support coordinators. I think that partnering has helped. I think it shows that it truly is, as I said earlier, a team approach. And I think that speaks well of the process and the way it should be. Um, Obviously, a choice of provider is always on the table. My role, I feel, is to provide the information so that educated decisions can be made, and obviously for the benefit and well-being of the consumer. I think it's easy to assume people have an understanding of what employment services truly is, and I think the tools that I simply want to share with you today are those that I have found beneficial to those planning teams and to support coordinators like yourself. I think that first slide really is symbolic of what the process should be, and that's simply to explore. And I think that's important. I think initially the process is really a two-step approach initially, and that would be to get the topic on the table. Do we discuss it? Do we look at it as an option to consider? And I know it's not a one size fits all approach, and I certainly would not imply that whatsoever. I think our goal is to find the right shoe size, uh, to find that right fit as we consider any area of support and services. But I think it's important to provide the information when we can get the topic on the table or during a planning meeting so that we can make those educated decisions for that consumer and for the benefit of him or her. I might throw out just to follow up some of Sandy's statistics in those slides to look at your own caseload, not that you have not, but look at your own caseloads and look at how many that are on your caseload that receive any kind of employment support. Nova, we're, as Sandy might have implied, we are on the waiver side, if you will, in terms of our services and our areas of support. So I'm coming to you from the perspective of employment being part of the waiver process and that whole system. The slide that you have in front of you now, I think, just basically reinforces some of my opening thoughts and perspectives. Is it an option for everyone? And I say that with the point of it's not a one size fits all. It's a very individualized approach, obviously, and there are many options to consider. Again, is it on the table? Again, that word partnering, I think, is critical. And not all providers are the same, and I understand that. But one of my priorities has been to establish that partnership and working alongside those planning teams and to provide that information. What I would really like to share with you is the tools that I have developed that I use during planning team meetings, either quarterlies or annually, to help create that awareness and increase that awareness about what employment services truly look like. I think there are some misunderstandings and misperceptions. No one's fault. I think sometimes, and I know this is cliche, but I think sometimes we assume or we don't know what we don't know. And I know that's a cliche, but I think that's true in this area. I think sometimes we cannot assume people have an accurate understanding of what employment services look like. The tools that I wanted to share with you that are on your next slide there that you're looking at really reflect an alignment with the state framework. And I think obviously that was very important as I started looking at tools or diagrams, if you will. I think visual diagrams are helpful. Explain a process, whatever that might be. It was very important to me to align our process with the state and the framework that and definitions that we follow. I think it was very important to do that, and rightly so. And it is a sequence. It's not rigid, but I think to allow the sequence to work to the benefit of the consumer, to the benefit of the planning discussions, I think it is a logical sequence. However, stepping aside from that, we've got a consumer who is currently employed, but within the planning committee discussions and dialogues and discussion of units, the recommendation was made for supported employment as an area of support, but also looping back and recommending career planning, which is more at the initial stage, if you will, because even though he's being successful at his current job site and employment setting, and I've been working with the management at that location, getting positive feedback, we felt it was important to loop back and look at that career planning as an area that he could benefit from. And without going into a lot of detail, because I could discuss this all afternoon, but career planning really involves, as you will see in the next slide, self-discovery and painting that self-portrait, if you will, and creating that self-awareness that leads then into perhaps employment fields and vocational themes, as we call them, that can build perhaps a roadmap that is even more appropriate and more fulfilling for the individual.
So, Chris, what I like here, these are both the visual tools that you created. So the first one there on the right was your first reiteration of this. So you did it like stepping stones, like somebody was climbing up steps. But then what you found out is that, well, maybe having them kind of like almost like a house blueprint foundation, kind of like that career planning is setting that wide foundation that then you're going to know what skills need to be developed if you're doing pre-vocational, or you're going to know what's going to make that good job match if you're going into job development. And of course, because that good foundation you laid in career planning, you also already know what kind of supports are going to be needed when that person has that job and you're providing that support employment. So you kind of did it like that pyramid, kind of showing one upon the other. And those are just two examples, but I know in a previous training I did, I think it was back in May, our May Champions of Employment, I used kind of a circle or a wheel showing that it's a continuing process. And Chris, the example that you were just talking about, somebody being in support employment and then circling back to career planning, that circle kind of illustrates that this is not a one and done. You're continually assessing satisfaction and what's the next step, and you might be going back and forth between the services. So using a visual that makes sense for that individual or makes sense for you to help explain that process, that's what it's about. So, as support coordinators, you can create your own tools. You can utilize what Chris has created, utilize what I've created, whatever makes sense for you.
Yeah, Sandy, I think that's a good point. I think if we can go back to the other one real quick. I think you made a good point and a good comparison between those two visuals. And I think they both reflect the process, but in different ways. And I think not only is it a step-by-step process, but also on the left there, I think that demonstrates well that it is a basis to build upon. And I think the career planning, I put a lot of emphasis in that area. I've developed and compiled a packet that guides us through that stage, if you will, so that we can come out of that with a true sense of the direction that we want to go. And all along, keep in mind, all along that consumer, and I've told consumers this: they're the ones building that roadmap. So I can establish that ownership and they can feel like they're in control of this with my facilitation. And I think that's important. That's one of those side benefits that I have seen. Uh, Self-advocacy, representing themselves, and ownership in the process. So it does reflect them. And I think sometimes unintentionally, we do not allow the individuals to have a voice in those issues and planning that directly affects them. So it's a one-on-one process, and it really provides them a sense of ownership and um, this self-discovery. One individual that I work with, she basically paraphrasing, she didn't know that about myself. So it really helps people understand their strengths. And as a side note, editorial comment, sometimes, and this I think is across the board, regardless of who or what profession or role you might be in, sometimes individuals don't know what their strengths are. And we need to assist individuals with that process of identifying what are my strengths. And sometimes, in fact, I think sometimes focus on what individuals can't do rather than what they can do. And I think this process really promotes the can do and building on their strengths and their interests. That next slide are additional tools that I've developed and used that I have found helpful to further detail what each of those four areas represent and what they reflect. In fact, during planning meetings, we can really get a sense of what the individual needs. And obviously, I know this is an obvious statement, but it's very needs driven. And this helps foster that, helps promote a very needs driven approach in that planning. So that it's really centered on the individual and what the planning team feels like he or she truly can benefit from. This complements that broader visual that we looked at before in terms of breaking them down into smaller parts. And again, increasing that awareness and that education as to what employment support and employment services truly looks like for that individual. So it's hand in hand, not only helping to see what the individual can benefit from and need at a given point on that continuum, but also help increase that awareness and enhance one's perspective as to what employment services look like. Also, I have found and appreciate the feedback from support coordinators feel it's been beneficial so that they have a takeaway when they're writing their justifications or using descriptions in that amendment or even the annual plan when they're incorporating this as a new goal area. If the planning committee can get to a point, we even look at hours per week translating into units. So the planning committee, particularly the support coordinator, has a sense of not only the area, the code, but also the number of units that we've agreed upon at the planning stage with that team, what the units need to be, or what they need to be for, say, a quarter, and then we come back and review them. So that has been a helpful tool for those planning sessions and that whole planning process as we explore employment. So basically at a planning committee, I would utilize that first slide. I would use this. We have a brochure that outlines our employment services. Or secondly, we've also scheduled separate employment services, quote, meetings when it's being explored as a possible goal area or a support area. And so we can go more in depth and in greater detail and not take up the time of, say, a quarterly. Sometimes it may not be on the agenda, but if it comes up, then I certainly offer, and we've done this, had a separate planning meeting just to look at employment, and so that we make sure all those involved, including the parent, guardian, consumer, and obviously the support coordinator, have a full understanding of what it represents and make good decisions that way. So sometimes we'll have a separate meeting just to look at it and introduce it. Obviously, it's not my decision. It's that planning committee's decision. I'm there just representing the area and helping answer questions and enhance the awareness and understanding of what it represents.
I think you bring up a good point there, Chris. As support coordinators, there's so much that support coordinators have to do and know. And sometimes it can be very overwhelming, especially when you think of the full array of services that are available under our waivers. And if you don't have a lot of experience requesting some of those services, it's very hard to remember, okay, what are these other options? So, one of the things that you pointed out to me when you and I first started talking about this is that partnership, that, if a support coordinator doesn't feel well versed in employment services, that's okay. But do you then reach out to a service provider or somebody else who might be more versed in those employment services, who can come and explain that to the individual and the family, so that they are aware of that option? So making sure to use all those tools in the toolbox, so to speak.
And as I mentioned, some of the indirect benefits that I have seen uh, is that empowerment. And I know that's sometimes a commonly used word, but I really feel like that's a side benefit, and that self-advocacy skills, as I mentioned. Uh, and of course, what we're after is job fulfillment. And this is a way to approach that and promote that. Of course, inclusionary practices and that employment obviously is a way to do that. Um, and independence, increasing that level of independence. So even though employment may seem like kind of a narrow area of support, there are all these side benefits that I see coming out as outgrowth of the process, and sometimes things you don't even expect or anticipate. So it's been a positive experience thus far, and I see it growing, and it's a work in progress to continue to find ways to improve what we do. Um, and my advice would be for support coordinators not to feel like they have to be well educated and develop expertise in all areas, as Sandy alluded to. Rely on others that to provide that information and help with that awareness. Don't expect yourself to wear all these different hats, would be my advice. And look at it as a partnership and a team approach.
So I want to take this opportunity. I did put Chris's email in the chat box, but I want to give you guys an opportunity to ask Chris some questions. So, or comment on something that he said, if something rang true with you. So take this opportunity to either put a question in the chat box or provide it, provide us with a comment. Are some of the strategies that Chris and his team took, are they resonating with you? Maybe you're already doing those kinds of things, or maybe you're like, oh, I'm going to start doing that. Um,
You know,
so
Sandy, if I could jump in, you you made the comment earlier from someone that had put in the chat, and I think I just want to look at, and I know I'm trying to be respectful over time, and I could keep going on and on about this, but the younger caseload, I think it's important, and I've done this in the past, but even partnering with high schools to start the process. And I know at times that senior year, they become more involved with voc rehab, and that's a good step. That's a good starting point, obviously. But I think sometimes parents and guardians aren't aware of what services are out there, or to connect with the regional office and get assigned and connected with a case management agency that we all work with and support coordinators are connected with, so and work out of. Sometimes I think that high school area is a great place to start developing that awareness of what's out there, whether it's voc rehab or getting connected with a support coordinator like you all, and look at different areas of support that might be needed. Again, parents don't know what's out there. So I think a younger caseload would be a great time to start looking at those high school years and start looking at what's after high school. Um, and what that roadmap looks like during those transition times from high school to what. See, so I think I'm glad that was pointed out, because that's another opportunity to um, start the process and look at those transition stages.
Definitely, you bring up some good points. So I know a lot of support coordinators I've talked with over the years. When we talk about those young children, we start talking about, okay, what are experiences that we've all had that have helped us in future employment? So you think about how is independence developed? How is that problem solving developed? Those interpersonal skills, and a lot of those that starts early on in life. Just exposure to, you know, um, how do I get my shoe on? Um, I want some milk, but it's too high. How do I get it off out of the refrigerator? What do I do? Getting along with my siblings, um, being able to tell my mother I disagree with her without getting reprimanded because I said it the wrong way. So we all have these opportunities for learning those interpersonal skills, those problem solving, becoming more independent, starting at a very early age. So that can be where it starts, where we're just talking about, are are we having those same experiences? Are we allowing individuals to kind of grow and develop those skills? And then, like you said, when we get closer to high school, are we starting to kind of educate the individual and their family as to options, what's available out there to help? Um, we know that VR typically doesn't start working with individuals until their last year of high school. But then there's all this other time that we could be working on something, that we could be doing something. And what are we connecting them with that helps them to develop those skills so that when they get out of high school, they're more ready? They're ready to go on to that next step. There was a question in the chat box. Someone commented that they love what they are hearing and it makes sense to do career planning prior to pre-voc. Currently, their organization does pre-employment, so they do that pre-voc before career planning. And the person's wondering, is there a right way or a wrong way to do things? So I'll let you field it from a service provider, and then I'll kind of come back in with kind of what the division's take is.
Well, I'll tell you what and again, as I said earlier, it's not a rigid system, but there is some method to it that makes sense. Um, my perspective and experience is that career planning stage, without being dramatic, is so essential in that building block, that initial base to build upon and to springboard off of. As you can see, some of the items that are listed there, which again is part of the state framework, those are so essential. And then, like I said, I've developed this packet that guides us through that stage alone, so that we get at and drill down all those interests and strengths and all those aspects that are hidden within that career planning stage, so that we do a good job. And again, I use the term painting that self-portrait, if you will, so that we can come away with solid vocational themes, which then can lead to building that roadmap. So pre-vocational skills are great. Those are intended to be generalized across different employment settings and opportunities. But I think that career planning serves as such a great base to build off of. Not that they can't be simultaneously provided. These don't necessarily work in isolation, but there is a sequence that makes sense, so that we can really do a good job of understanding who that individual is and making those good matches in the future. But pre-vocational is more about, as we all know, building those skills that can be transferred and applied in various settings. Whereas career planning serves a totally different purpose that I think has served well in the whole process. And really that self-discovery and exploration, and understanding eventually what size shoe that we need to uh, explore.
You made a very good point there, Chris, about, that career planning really provides a lot of that foundational information. But at the same time, as you also stressed, it's not a one size fits all. So it's really, it's kind of an individualized process if you really look at it. So it's looking at what is the individual needs. Sometimes an individual will come to us and we already know we need to work on X, Y, and Z skills. We know that without these skills, this person's not going to be successful. So we already know those skills need to be developed. So that may be a perfect opportunity where we are starting with pre-vocational before doing career planning. There may be other times where somebody comes to us and maybe we're a little bit fuzzy. Maybe we think they might need to work on some skills, but we're not quite exactly positive on that because given the right conditions, that may not be an issue. So sometimes, it makes sense to start with that career planning first. From the division's perspective, we don't stipulate that you have to start with one service or another. It really is what makes sense for that individual, where they are in that process and what supports they need.
I
So,
was working with an individual and a staff person that happened to uh, be there assisting the individual and was in that setting, made the comment to the effect he wished that he'd had this type of a process when he was in high school. So it makes sense for anyone. The process makes sense for anyone that's looking at job exploration and developing that roadmap. Even though the system looks rigid, it is not rigid because career planning promotes individualization of it. And I think that's an important point to make. This is merely a framework and provides consistency within the system and those various stages, but that career planning and all four aspects, all four stages promotes individualization. So it's built in there to make sure we promote an individual approach and totally needs driven.
all right. So now we want to do another quick little reality check and we want to find out from you. So where do you struggle when coordinating those employment services? Is it in being able to identify individuals that have an interest in employment? So if we look at it, just having that topic on the radar, having it on the table. Maybe it's identifying individuals who would benefit from waiver funding versus when to go to VR. So maybe that's where, you feel like you might need some more support. Is it identifying the specific employment supports that one requires? So kind of, I know somebody's interested in employment, but I don't know which service to start with. Career planning, pre-voc, job development. What do I need to ask for and how much do I need to ask of it? Um, Maybe it's being able to describe those employment services. So being able to have that conversation and present that information to an individual and their family so that they know what the options are. Or maybe where you struggle is with something else entirely. Maybe it's in addressing some of the barriers that person might have, whether it be transportation, benefits. So take a quick moment to answer that. You can select all that apply. And if you select other, please put it in the chat box what you're thinking, what you struggle with, what you could use more support with.
Sandy, as they're doing that, just maybe a closing remark on my part is I hope this has been helpful and brought about a different perspective or awareness. And even if the takeaway is to affect one consumer within each of your caseloads, I think we've done a nice job today to make some impact in the areas that you all are involved with and the areas of the state. So even if we've impacted one person on your caseload today, um, I think that'd be tremendous. So again, feel free to email me if you would like any follow-up discussions or want any more information that I can share with you. Don't hesitate to do that.
Thanks, Chris. And all right, so the results are.
Give me a second, Sandy.
That's okay. It looks like we got something in the chat box. So somebody put in the chat box, identifying those employment services one requires, including the number of units. So kind of being able to identify those specific employment services. And it seemed like that's where a lot of people, well, quite a few people, about 9 of you indicated that that was an area that you struggle with. Being able to identify those who would benefit from waiver funded supports versus VR. So knowing when to make that referral also is kind of that area where you feel you might need some support. And quite a few people also mentioned being able to describe those employment services. So again, kind of what Chris mentioned earlier, hopefully you've kind of picked up a little tip or a strategy that you feel might be useful, whether it's taking advantage of something visual to present to individuals. Another thing I would suggest is, maybe reach out to service providers. So like Chris created those visuals that he uses. There may be other service providers that have created some visuals for being able to explain the employment services and talk about them. So reach out to some service providers in your area to see what they're using and if they'd let you use something, or even having a service provider coming and talking. So comments that we're seeing in the chat. Okay, one of the biggest barriers when transportation's not provided, that's kind of shutting down the discussion right there. Families, want to know that their loved one is going to be able to get to and from work. So kind of how do we talk about that? How do we help them navigate transportation?
Sandy, one thing I stress with consumers or those that I might be working with is if we start at that basic block, then as we get closer down that roadmap or even developing a starting point, then we can start addressing the issues that might come into play when looking at employment opportunities. But I really de-emphasize in those that I'm working with, if it should come up, I really de-emphasize quote jobs or employment so that we can really start developing those basic understandings and that career planning stage and really give it integrity rather than not to dismiss those concerns, but I kind of try and set those aside so they don't tarnish what we're trying to do at those early stages and then start working out those details when that time occurs. So that that's not an early roadblock before we can start the process and really identifying where the roadmap needs to take us.
And I know I tend to look at career planning as trying to identify not only someone's interests and abilities and what jobs intersect with those interests and abilities, but also looking at those needed conditions. And sometimes transportation might be something that fits into a needed condition. If you're talking about, somebody whose parents work 9 to 5 and it's like, okay, I'm not going to be available to take them to work, to and from work during those hours, then kind of looking at, okay, what are we saying? Are we saying that they need to start work about the same time mom or dad starts work so that they have a way to work and they're only having to worry about how to get home from work. Um, are we talking about, needing to have something that might be more affordable? So if somebody's having to um, use a cab to get to and from work or something like that, and maybe it's going to be a lot cheaper if it's within a 5 mile radius versus a 10 mile radius. So knowing that that might be a needed condition.
Sandy, I see a couple over there, because I know our time is
Yes, yes.
at a minimum here, but there are two over there I wanted to, because there are several on transportation. And again, I would stress that would come down the road to start looking at challenges that might come up and find solutions. In terms of needing to find a job right away, I think it depends on where an individual is on the continuum as to how much time we might spend on any one stage. And if we have that luxury of working through the process, uh, as opposed to someone who needs a job, and start assessing where that person might be on the continuum. Maybe pre-voc skills is where we jump in, and that person's ready to start exploring employment opportunities. Um, what I stress, and not to take away from that question whatsoever, because that's a reality that we face. Um, what I think it's important to stress where that person is again on that continuum, and not to get into an employment situation and I've said this, and then in 2 weeks down the road, this is not a good fit for me, or I want to change jobs. So even though it may be an immediate need, and I get that, whether financial or otherwise, what we try and prevent and want to prevent uh, is front loading it to the point of making the best possible match we can, and building those business partnerships so that we can, and I know this is a cliche, but setting that person up for success as much as we can. The other question is that I would want to hit really quick in terms of sharing it with parents. I think that's a great question. Glad that you brought that up. I do, yes. Parent, guardian, whoever is involved in that planning team meeting. In fact, a parent, I emailed that 2-pager out to them, and they had it during a remote planning meeting, and the parent held it up, and she had it there and was looking at them, and was even checking or identifying areas that she was very interested in exploring and providing. So it's a great tool, regardless of what role anybody might have on that planning committee, to again help with the awareness so that people are on the same page and they have that basic understanding of what it represents. Um, again, so that educated decisions can be made in the best interest of that consumer. And that's what it's all about. So yes, I do share it, whether in person at a planning committee meeting, or I email it in advance of, so that they can take a look at it. Again, working in partnership with the support coordinator, uh, so that again, we're on the same team, and I don't want to take away from that support coordinator's role whatsoever. We're a provider, and I'm there to assist and facilitate, but uh, respectful of the roles that everyone on that team has. And uh, again, it's not my decision, but I want to make sure people have a good understanding of what it represents.
Another one of the comments in the chat box was about the timing being an issue, and specifically, waiting to go through the process when the person needs to find a job right away, which I think kind of goes to another issue. Somebody needs that income, they're wanting to get a job right now, and you're like going, wait, let's do career planning first. Um, and sometimes individuals are like, no, I want to get a job right now. But one of the things that I want to stress here, the division has put out some information that allows us to be a little bit more proactive with employment. A lot of times, support coordinators are used to not requesting a service until it's a need. So, it's like, I'm not going to request support employment when the person's still in career planning because we don't have a job yet. But the division has put out some guidance that allows us to be a little bit more proactive with employment. So when we know somebody is is using employment services. Maybe they're starting with that career planning, or they're working on pre-vocational, they're working on skills, but we know there's that interest in employment. We can be proactive and we can say, hey, we're going to also request some supported employment in case, in the event they get offered a job during that career planning or during that pre-vocational service, so that we're not having to delay that support. We're not having to wait to then go amend the ISP, get it through the UR process, and get those services started, because we know a lot of times it doesn't work out too well when there's a delay. So just letting you guys know that we can be a little proactive with the employment services. So moving forward, just a reminder, we do this on the second Wednesday of every month. So November 10th will be our next one. Then of course, December 8th and January 12th. So 1:30 to 2:30. And as always, at the end, please take a minute or two to complete that survey. That survey is so critical in helping me to plan the future topics and what makes sense for you guys, what you need to hear more of. So my contact information, if you need to reach out to me, so my phone number is 636-926-1229. And my email is sandy.kaiser, and that is spelled Keyser, @dmh.mo.gov. And again, a great, big, huge shout out. Thank you to all of you for participating, and to Chris for being our guest speaker and walking us through how Novus Center of the Ozarks is helping to coordinate employment support. So you all have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you next month.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you.